Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, July 2nd, 2020. I got it right here. The JUL helps apparently make it a little easier for me to get the month right than the JUN ever did. Daily Co's Radio is live now, we are told reliably by Bill in Portland, Maine. Unless Trump preempts the show, which is always possible, by destroying the planet. That's the only way we would let him do it. I wouldn't even let him do that. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of things. Kagro X, me, David Waldman. We'll spend the next 2 hours tap dancing with sparklers. Let's listen in. Why not? Let's see. What do I got by way of sound effects for that? Nothing, I guess. I can't tap, actually, and I'm in sandals, so it's not really going to work very well. I could get some metal plates and nail them to the bottom, I think. But all right. Well, anyway, this is what we've got here today. Thursday, July 2nd. What do we have on tap for you? Oh, you know, a little pandemic, a little civil unrest, a little still somehow ignoring bounties on American troops. But other than that, I don't know. We'll see what Greg Dworkin has rounded up for us. Should be another exciting day. And I would say, though, the odds of being preempted by Trump doing anything at 9 in the morning are pretty low. The only thing I know of that he doesn't, well, he does sometimes tweet at 9 in the morning, and he can't possibly, I suppose, destroy the world that way. But other than that, getting up and getting out of bed to do things, it's only golf I know of that he gets up and does relatively early. And I mean, you know, as golf goes, when you're talking about golf fanatics, the golf fanatics I know are up at, you know, when they get a chance to play at 6 in the morning during the summer months, they're up and out the door like that all the time. Trump waits, I guess if you own your own golf course and you get a free limo ride there and back and nobody's allowed to get in your way and you get a police escort, I suppose I would play later too if I had that option available to me. But I don't. All right. Well, let's see. What other things have we got to share with you today? I'll remind myself briefly of what happened in the world yesterday by turning on the computers and taking a look at Pocket, where I keep all of these stories filed away, and I try to forget them overnight with some restful sleep. Does that work for you? I don't know whether anybody's been able to do that in the past couple of months. I've been reading a little bit, people talking about on Twitter, I guess as New Yorkers and New York area, anyway, New York people, although it's really seems to be kind of limited to New Yorkers inside of New York City proper somewhere. And maybe it's even just like Manhattanites and fashionable Brooklynites, I suppose. But I think this probably, or I should say, the experience is probably common to all New Yorkers. The only ones I see in my self-selecting Twitter feed talking about it seem to be a little bit more, I don't know, whatever, more skewed towards Manhattan, Brooklyn, etc. But talking about how difficult, well, for one thing, among other things, talking about how difficult it was to sleep during the height of the pandemic in New York City with all the sirens going off. And, of course, the knowledge that each one of those sirens was carrying, most likely, a victim of COVID-19 to the hospital, or I guess, I don't know if they turn on the sirens taking people who had died anywhere. I don't know if they take anybody who died anywhere. They may leave them for the coroner or others to transport. Not a part of life or death that I was particularly familiar with. But it was very interesting watching people talk about the trauma of it and talking about it, of course, in the context of, I mean, we'd heard those stories, but hearing them in the context of, I did all this and I locked myself in my apartment to avoid sickness and possible death and try and flatten the curve and leave the healthcare system available for those who needed it most. And all of it's gone to waste because of a number of states that pushed a political line and opened up too early and destroyed all the work that we had done. It made me think, of course, it made me think, well, first thing it made me think was the silly and somewhat selfish response of, it bothered me that it was being framed in terms of, well, only New Yorkers understand something like this. But New York definitely did experience the pandemic differently. And I guess it's something of an amateur sport for New Yorkers to dismiss the experience of suburban New Jerseyites who also experienced something relatively horrific. I grew up in the suburban New Jersey area, so just talking to my parents during the pandemic, we didn't have it nearly as bad, certainly not in our area of Virginia, but it was a weekly reminder. Every time I talk to my parents, that somebody on the block had died from COVID-19, and you get a phone call, how's things going? Okay, good. We're all right. We're safe so far. It's really getting to us. Blah, blah, blah. By the way, your old high school track coach died from COVID-19 last week. Really? Wow. Yeah. He was the second person this week in the neighborhood. Oh, okay. So, it was just, we all got those reminders. But the thing that really struck me, though, was about the people speaking out about how much trauma and trouble there had been and how it was all being undone. Although it won't all be visited upon the people who made that sacrifice, which is kind of interesting. But of course, then I guess they sort of talked themselves through the crisis by saying, we're saving everybody else this tragedy by demonstrating for them. We have no choice. We can't magically undo it, but we can show them what a horror this thing is and how difficult it is to live in lockdown. And I give them credit for that. They're absolutely right that they made this tremendous sacrifice in order to show everybody else that this could still be avoided. And people resented it and said, to hell with that. We want to have, they didn't say it out loud, but their actions spoke louder than their words. We want to have this visitor hours. We don't believe it's true. We got to see it with our own eyes in order to believe that this thing is really happening. They resented the fact that they had to lock down. I forget who said it, too. It was saying, why do we have to all play by New York rules? And just thinking back on how fortunate it was and what an amazing thing it was that we got the rest of the country to lock down based on New York's experience, when ordinarily they would separate themselves as hard as they could from New York's experience and not want to do anything that they did. And we had the opportunity for them never to have this visited upon them. And they instead said, oh, yeah? Well, we're going to have it. And now they have it. I don't know. This catches no one by surprise, I guess. It was as predictable as anything. But it really just, I guess, struck me yesterday as I watched the New Yorkers talk about how all their efforts have maybe gone down the tubes. Greg Dworkin is here, and he's relatively close to the New York area and a New Yorker originally, so he felt it just the same in the suburbs on the other side of the city. And,
right, which had a different experience. Yeah. But I have to tell you, I can't remember either who said that, but It sounds like something Ted Cruz or Dan Crenshaw would have said. And, of course, Texas is having their issues now, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Yes. But the other part about the New York experience is that just when you were trying to catch yourself up from, a month and a half's worth of not sleeping because of the sirens, then there's the fireworks wars, which doesn't let you sleep either. And we didn't have that in the suburbs. We were hit pretty badly, though. Even in this quiet town, everybody knew somebody who died. Everybody knew somebody or a couple of somebodies who had it and was in the hospital. Yeah. And we all locked down, and we're still semi-locked down in the sense that we don't go out if we don't have to. And when you do, you wear a mask if you're going to be doing something other than walking the dog on the deserted street. The joggers don't wear masks, but then again, they, pass each other across the side of the street and are doing pretty good social distancing. I'm not so worried about that, especially outdoors. But everybody's masked. You go to the store, everybody's masked. Now, I can't swear to it that everybody keeps the mask over their nose. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a personal, problem. I have every time that happens. I mention to them, by the way, I'm a doctor. You should put that over your nose. Oh, okay, fine. Most of the people around here are pretty good about it. But, I do find the occasional person who isn't. Even the people who I get into political arguments with, because they have Fox News on and I want them to change the channel, are wearing masks in the like when you get your car serviced and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, it's a totally different experience. Texas, on the other hand, is having a huge problem right now. And of course, you can't separate the politics from the public health part of it. I feel like I'm like an intersectional commentator here on these topics. But you go down to Texas, there's an amazing piece that was on CNN this morning entitled Overwhelmed. CNN goes inside Texas hospital overwhelmed with patients. It's not overrun yet, but it's pretty close. And they're talking about how difficult it is to even do things like move a patient from the emergency room to a CAT scan because you got to get gowned and gloved, and it's a whole procedure. And it's just difficult. You can't do it quickly.
Yeah. By the way, I'm reminded, Meredith chimes in here. It was Brett Stevens had written that, why do we have to play by New York rules? And I see Bobblespeak, too, has got the title and everything. So
terrific.
He was in New York. Or maybe he had fled New York, perhaps, at that point.
Maybe. I don't know. But I can tell you around the rest of the country, it's not uncommon to say, well, if New York does it this way, we want to do it that way.
Yeah.
But
like
that's
picante
just
sauce.
dumb. It's just stupid. And so people are now appreciating, in a bad way, what it's like when the medical services in their cities, like Houston, are overwhelmed and have to be heroes and have to work double shifts and get sick because of it. And are basically at risk of, and in some cases, dying in order to take care of people.
Yeah.
And at risk are the reporters who are following them through the hospitals doing this too. So they should get hazard pay. But it's real, and so sometimes it does in fact have to hit you in order for you to realize maybe it's not such a good idea to go out to bars.
Yes.
Because that's the one single thing, the nightlife.
Isn't that weird? Yeah.
That's been, associated with these latest outbreaks, not protests, but going out and eating in restaurants and yelling at the top of your lungs at crowded bars where it's noisy.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty bad idea. Church and choir is a problem lately.
That's another problem. And, again, we have a federal government that's doing literally everything wrong. I mean, if you wanted to go and try and spread coronavirus, you couldn't come up with a better plan than what the federal government has come up with. Now, that's slowly changing as it dawns on them that, hey, these are Trump voters that are at risk. This one is from Carol Leonnig, Washington Post. In Trump's wake in Tulsa, he fumed his news leaked to staff rally was infected. The campaign quizzed nurses if they leaked it. Some campaign staff said they were urged not to get tested. And cases of coronavirus spiked in Tulsa immediately after the rally. Now, that's not because of the rally, but it's likely because, first of all, it was going to spike, and secondly, because now people had an impetus with all the discussion about it to get tested. So when you test, you find. Trump's mantra, oddly enough, this whole past 2 weeks has been, we're fine. Pence keeps saying, we're fine. It's just that we're testing more, so naturally we're finding more cases. This is a case where, in fact, that's true at Trump rallies. But for the rest of the country, the point is it's there. And you find it if you test, but that itself doesn't make the cases more. How do you know? You have to look and see what the percent positive is. If you're testing and you just do more testing and then find a few cases, the percent positive is going to pretty much stay the same. But if you're, in fact, having a big outbreak, what's going to happen is that the tests that you do, the positive part of it is going to spike. And we actually have a little a graph of that I put here. Many states seeing a high number of tests coming back positive. U.S. states with a positive case rate over 5%. The smallest numbers, Washington State, 5.2, Oklahoma, 5.6. In other words, if you just keep testing, you should see those under 5%. That's where we want.
Yes.
But at the higher end, Arizona 24.4, Florida 15.6, Alabama 15.2, Nevada 15.1, Texas 14.1, Mississippi 14.1, South Carolina 13.7. Those are the states most at risk. And within those states, particularly in a place like Texas, the 14.1 is misleading because in a city like Houston, it might be a lot higher than that.
Yeah, well, it certainly could be. They tech that it averages out lower, I guess, over all of rural Texas as well. And those are the states at risk now. Of course, the states that we're in the same game again. Now these states are at risk, and there's another slate of states that are still out there saying, we just don't have it. We just don't.
Yeah, there's no reason for us to shut down.
Right. So
we're not Houston.
When they get it before Houston rids itself of it, once they begin to see their numbers go down, and we start to see these other states flaring up, then they'll say, "Oh my gosh, nobody said anything about a third wave." And I'm like, no, it's still the first one.
And also the lag time. Again, people are doing it less, but they're still talking about, but nobody's dying. Actually, they are. They're starting to see the death rates go up. Certainly that was true with Arizona yesterday. And there's a lag time. So you got to wait 2 or 3 weeks to start to see that. That doesn't mean that the deaths are going to reach New York numbers. There's a lot of things that went into deaths in New York, including the overabundance of nursing home problems. Yes. But pre-existing conditions are who's at risk, and people will die. And so saying that, they're not dying at the rate that they were in New York, and therefore it's fine, is incredibly short-sighted, cruel, and stupid. And it's especially true if you're making that determination now when you know that things are going to happen later. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. That's true in a lot of different areas. This morning, for example, slightly changing topics. We have the unemployment report out because tomorrow's a holiday, part of the July 4th weekend. And there's 4.8 million jobs created, much more than people expected. That's because there was a surge of hiring. So the good news is some people returned to work. Reports are that many are those furloughed. But the bad news is unemployment rate still 11.1. It's actually 12 if you adjust. Higher than the Great Recession. Only a third of the jobs that were there in January have returned. And all of these numbers were before these latest shutdowns, so the numbers aren't going to be that good next month. So you can't look at these numbers and say, they're great. Well, you know what's coming next month. Yes, but I want to concentrate on right now because it fits my narrative.
Yes, but there's a lag time.
There is, and so that's the point.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm just thinking about all the people who got hired for restaurants that now aren't reopening or whatever.
For example. And so you can't look at this and say, this is great. It's not great. And for people who got pulled back in for shorter hours, it doesn't feel normal, particularly if you're about to lose it again.
Yeah. By the way, breaking news, because we love nothing more than taking news and breaking it and smashing it to bits.
What broke this thing?
You want me to tell you the news? I just wanted to let you know that there was breaking news.
Yeah,
you go find out yourself. Ghislaine Maxwell has been arrested by the FBI. Jeffrey Epstein's... let's see. As NBC News puts it, confidant, British and
special
British
assistant. Let's just call her a special assistant.
Right. Yes. Kidnapping Gal Friday. Anyway, so I just thought I would put that out there. We'll investigate that later on.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Right. I know it's terrific. Trump is going to have a press conference about it.
Right. Anyway, so you have all of that happening at the same time. Things are getting so bad. How bad are they getting, Johnny? Things are getting so bad that the people on Fox and Friends are starting to advocate wearing masks.
Yes, right. It is. We had a big shift yesterday. Trump
shift came. Trump came out and said, I wear a mask sometimes. You'll never see me, but I do, I promise.
He invented it.
And the people on Fox and Friends, Steve Doocy, epidemiologist, was saying, these masks might be a bad idea. It's really too bad. It's been politicized.
Oh, yeah? Okay. I don't know how that happened.
I don't know. Well, we have nighttime hosts saying maybe it's not a bad idea. We have Mitch McConnell. We have, all sorts of Republicans are saying it, and again, as Felix Frankfurter used to say, wisdom often comes not at all, so don't make fun of it if it comes late. And I'm fine. I wrote this morning, I'm thrilled that Republicans, including the cabinet members on Fox and Friends, are advocating wearing masks. The public health aspects of it are too important to dismiss. They're messengers that might reach their audience, and that takes precedence over making fun of them.
Yeah, I mean, don't worry. There's a lot of reasons to make fun of them.
Exactly. We got other things too.
Yeah. Sure. And of course, we'll all remember what happened with the masks and how long it took them to come around to it, and whatever. Okay, we'll take it. Yeah, it doesn't mean I have to pat him on the head necessarily. I just say, okay, good.
What I'm doing, since again the big risk states for me right now are Florida, Texas, and Arizona, and they happen also to be the states with the most recalcitrant Republican governors, at least the most visible ones. And so I'm trying to keep track of what they're doing and how they backtrack from, we're never going to close down, you can't force us.
Oh, yeah,
Which, again, is another thing that I see on Twitter all the time. Well, it's terrible, but you can't close again. Of course you can, and we will.
Yeah.
We're going to be forced to do this. I mean, what do you mean we can't?
It could be that the governor doesn't say it, but everybody just says, I'm sick, so I'm closed.
Right, I'm not going in.
Or I don't want to be sick.
The other side of the coin, though, is that they are stopping. Some of them are doing things like closing bars despite the protests. But in Texas,
protests.
the governor still wants to override anything that a local authority wants to do that's even more than that. So that'll be interesting to watch, particularly in places like Houston, which are the big medical centers that are having the big issues right now and getting overwhelmed. And watching them and seeing them backtrack, and then, I don't expect them to say they were wrong, because governors never do that. I just expect them to do the right thing and say it was my idea. And so, the question is, how quickly or slowly is it going to take to do that? And each one of them, Texas, Arizona, Florida, are doing exactly that, but at different rates.
I love the statewide control over local activity. Right? It makes so much sense, right? And you can only wash one hand in Texas.
You can't try and
Doesn't
save
matter
yourself.
what-
I haven't given you permission to do that yet.
Right. Exactly. Right. And it's the same guys, by the way, who are up for shooting your neighbors or anybody who walks by on the street because, of course, you're trying to protect yourself.
Well, but again, you step back and say, why are they doing this? And the answer is they feel, as Republicans, they're obligated to follow the White House line that it's important to open up, because that's the only thing Trump has, like with today's better than expected job numbers, which still are pretty bad, right? Because Trump is clearly getting clobbered in this election, probably has lost already. And the only chance he has is to run on the economy, which you can't do if you're closed down. And so they're forcing the economy open too soon because they're trying to help Trump get reelected, and themselves and the Republican Party. And of course, it's backfiring in the most spectacularly bad way right now. And so they're forced to, change their tactics. But they, in fact, have made it even worse, because the fact of the matter is you cannot open up until you get the virus under control, and they haven't taken that step. They jumped a step. And when you do that, sometimes, it's great if you're trying to anticipate things and you just want to get to the end of the story. And sometimes it's not so great, and you can be spectacularly wrong. And in this case, that's what's happening. So in an attempt to help Trump and prop up the Republican Party, they're killing their own citizens, and now they're dealt that hand
Who cares?
that they dealt themselves,
Yes.
and they're trying to figure out how to play it, and they're playing it badly.
All right. Well, you could have played it better, and there was an opportunity to learn, but something. Old Europe and New York City kept you from absorbing
Meanwhile,
lessons.
despite the fact that Trump's economic numbers are probably the only thing that's slightly in his favor, as opposed to everybody thinking that he's doing a terrible job with everything else, the Biden campaign said it raised $141 million in June, which was more than Trump. Trump announced yesterday he was in the 130s. It was great. We have a juggernaut. We have the Death Star. It's 130. And then Biden said, yeah, well, actually, we have more than that.
Right.
And that was a little gamesmanship, because I don't think they're obligated to report till next week. But they did anyway. And so it turns out that's the second month in a row Biden outraised Trump. And, of course, he's doing fairly well in just about all of the polls, which is more than a little bit interesting. And there's lots of reasons for that. But there's these little subtle under-the-radar down-ballot races giving you the same idea. Indiana 5, which Trump won by 12 points in 2016, is now a toss-up, according to Crystal Ball, for example. They have a whole article out today, House Democratic murmurings in the Texas suburbs and elsewhere, 11 ratings changes, most in favor of Democrats.
All right.
So when you have things like that happening, there was a poll, and more to say about Steve Daines after the break, but or maybe we'll get that in before the break. But Bullock, the Democrat, 47, Daines, the Republican incumbent senator, 43.
Okay, good.
And that state has been moved to lean D from toss-up.
Okay.
And so you have these down-ballot races giving you the sense that the environment is favoring Democrats right now. Generic ballot's pretty good for them. And you look at these races, small and big, and saying, with this particular environment, maybe those governors aren't doing their own party a favor by screwing things up so bad.
Yeah,
because it's not just the White House race that it's going to show up in.
Yeah.
Now, why is this happening? Because basically, they're racist. There's an article from New York Magazine. Oh. Actually, D.C. is full of real people. This is a reference to Steve Daines explaining that you really don't want D.C. statehood because, real people live elsewhere.
Yeah, right. We saw that with George Allen and his macaca comments and the real Virginia.
Kind of code.
That really works.
Sometimes it's a little more explicit. This is from our favorite blog, Blue Virginia, for our favorite state, Virginia, because we love people in Virginia. Another typical Virginia Republican reaction to Confederate statues coming down. I think the Richmond Times-Dispatch had the big headline today, Stonewall Down.
Well, yes.
Because that was the next statue to go. No surprise that liberal mayor, says John McGuire for Congress, LeVar Stoney has once again abused his authority to appease the mob calling for the illegal removal of statues in Richmond. He's just another Democratic tyrant.
Grr.
At least he didn't say Democrat tyrant, who continues to drive our communities toward chaos and destruction. On top of that, he's carelessly eliminating history that shows how far we've come in pushing Richmond toward anarchy through his illegal and unconstitutional actions. This is what you get when you elect radical Democrats.
Wow, it sounds like such an accurate description of what's going on. I already forgot who Stonewall Jackson is because the statue is gone. Of course, we still have Stonewall Jackson National Memorial Shrine in Virginia, believe it or not.
I thought it was a monument to Stonewall Inn. That's what they should replace it with.
Right, sure. Why not try that? They don't have to change the name. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. A little discussion of Stonewall Jackson during the break, prompting Brian Monroe to chime in from Canada with the question, wasn't Stonewall Jackson a Flintstones character like Stoney Curtis? They may have made some mention of him. They may have worked him into the program at some point. But
definitely a bedrock general, without question.
Certainly sounds like it. Okay, I'm trying to think of some other people that they may have missed out on, but I don't know. Generals' names don't often lend themselves to that. But the Flintstones writers were always on the ball looking for some sort of geological reference that they could use to work a celebrity in there.
Yeah. Mr. Slate, Rocky Granite, you got to have names like that.
Yeah.
So here's some observations about the numbers that came out in terms of the employment data. Michael Linden tweets, underneath the big headline number, there's some disturbing trends. Non-temporary layoffs increased by over 500,000. Black male unemployment rate increased. Gap between white and black unemployment grew. Over 30 million still on unemployment insurance. And the data's from before, as we said, this latest surge. And, the closings in the states were predictable because you know that the virus is going to get worse and therefore you're going to be forced. We have Republicans in the Senate who say we're not going to do anything further on unemployment insurance and there's going to be no rescue package. And I looked at that and said, well, that's stupid because the virus is going to force you to. I don't know why you want to be on the record on being on the wrong side of this. when you know that circumstances may in fact force a change. And so that just tells me that, like Trump, they don't really understand the pandemic. They're not trying to, and they're still treating this like a messaging issue and not a public health crisis. And as long as that's the case, their response is not going to get any better, and their political future is not going to get any better. They are so intertwined. You can't use a temporary good jobs report with caveats, with asterisk, as a way to reverse your fortunes, especially when the public right now, 2/3, according to Navigator research, still is more concerned about the virus than they are about the health of the economy.
Okay. It's been interesting that there's been this debate apparently inside the White House. That was the headline that sparked a lot of this discussion too yesterday. A debate inside the White House of which one to tackle first. Should we turn our attention back to the pandemic we never got out of, or stay laser focused, I guess they must think they're laser focused on the economy? And everybody I saw reacting to it, I don't understand how you think you can deal with the economy without dealing with the pandemic. That's the cause of the economic slide. What's wrong with you?
It's a false dichotomy. It's pretty clear what to do, as you just articulated. Now, this is interesting. This is an article I just came across in Politico when I was looking for the one that you were just mentioning. Democratic ad makers think they've discovered Trump's soft spot. After more than a year of polling, focus groups, and message testing against the president, there's a growing consensus about what damages Trump and what doesn't. Now, this is not, Trump bad. He is. What? The question's what works.
Okay.
There's a growing consensus among Democrats about what kind of hits on Trump are most likely to persuade swing voters and which ones won't. In 2016, ad makers focused on Trump's character, but they're not doing that. They're pouring tens of millions of dollars into ads yoking his behavior to substantive policy issues surrounding the coronavirus, the economy, and the civil unrest since the death of George Floyd.
Okay.
Duh.
Well,
the things that actually make him bad. I think they're getting their cues from Project Lincoln and Republican voters against Trump, which are doing savage ads on these very topics.
Yeah.
Bradley Bagchuk, president of the progressive group American Bridge, said you can't chase the Trump clown car. Him drinking water and throwing the glass is goofy, but it doesn't matter in the scheme of things. What people care about is the outbreak.
Well, yes, I would think so.
Right? In the preparations for 2020, outside Democratic groups spent more than a year surveying voters, which is funny because, this is only like the last 3 months that there's been an outbreak. So all that polling we did for a year, actually, we're going to throw it out the window and we're going to pay attention to what's going on right now.
Well, you had to try and prepare. You didn't know there was going to be an outbreak. You prepare for something else. Okay.
So they say, while Trump may not be vulnerable on issues of character alone, as he demonstrated in 2016, he is vulnerable when character is tied to his policy record on the economy and healthcare, right? Trump is stupid. Who cares? Well, Trump is so stupid, he's going to kill you. Oh, well, that matters.
That was the
Trump
subtext.
Is a crook. I don't care. Well, Trump is a crook who's stealing from you. Oh, well, that kind of matters.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I feel like we said that, but maybe we just didn't.
Trump
say
is a
that.
racist.
We couldn't prove
I don't
it
care.
yet.
Yeah, but what he's doing is going to make you feel really uncomfortable. It's not just economic anxiety anymore. They're starting to say this stuff out loud. And when you do that, you lose voters.
Yeah. That and Nazi imagery on the T-shirts. We'll get to that later.
Right. So the ad makers obviously are going to work on more positive Biden stuff. That's stuff that people have to say because you got to sell ads. But, the fact is, things have changed so dramatically. The connection between the character of the president and the president's ability to protect people, whether from economic collapse or pandemic, is really important. So Tad Devine, of all people, because people are so desperate to turn the page from what's happening in America today, which is true. And that's why Joe Biden, who is also known as Mr. Generic Democrat, is just doing so fine. And by the way, all of the discussion that we've had so far, and we've talked about this for 36 minutes, hasn't even touched on the big issue, the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, unfortunately.
Well, that's why we've been avoiding it for 36 minutes, but now 37 comes up, and what is it?
Opening schools in the fall.
How
are we going to do that?
We can't do
This is an article from the San Francisco Chronicle. Just in, more than 40 South Bay school principals are in quarantine after being exposed to COVID-19 during an in-person meeting to plan the reopening of schools, or as Jody Biggs put it, that's what you call a teachable moment.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, where we're going to hold this thing? I got an idea. We can hold it outdoors. Yes, good idea. In a yard full of rakes with the, yeah, okay, sure.
Well, do your damn Zoom backgrounds.
Yeah, right. Okay, man. So, well, that teaches you something.
It does. You may think of it as a dad joke, but the fact of the matter is it highlights how difficult it is to do this and what we should do. The American Academy of Pediatrics says the presence of students in the classroom is so important it overrides worries about getting infected. You just have to do it carefully. I'm not sure that that's a great idea that's going to fly, but we'll see. At the same time, I looked up, places like the National Association of Elementary School Principals, in case you didn't know such a thing exists. And I can't really find a clearinghouse for guidelines about how we're going to do this. So
that would help.
The time that we have, because you're all going to be home with this next wave of the first wave, maybe we should start working on a clearinghouse for such things so we could be sure. Connecticut has theirs. Yeah. But what are the other states doing and what are best practices? And that's stuff that we need to be working on now.
What if they all got together in some sort of
virtual
union
way,
or grouping in a way, and but they shared information, and there was an overarching governing structure that held the states together and could discover and disseminate such information.
Well, the federal government's pretty lousy on school issues, always has been. Department of Education is like an advisory group.
I was going to say we should start a new department then that has some focus on education. But as far as I can tell, the only involvement they've had in primary schooling was to tell them to get AR-15s to defend against bear attacks.
Yeah, something like that. So it's a big hole, and one of the many holes that really needs to be filled. So with all of that, we've got issues. They are partially addressed. The focus on what to do now with the spiking cases is certainly going to take resources and time and thought away from planning for the fall, unfortunately. But it's all work that has to be done. Now, I can tell you, from trying to do this in 2009, schools were always the biggest difficult issues. Everybody wanted to punt and kick the can down the road because half of the experts who would generally reach consensus on everything else, half the experts felt the schools should close in 2009 and the other half felt they shouldn't. I mean, just to give you an idea of how difficult it is. In the middle of that pandemic, it was recognized that closing schools are such a big burden to working parents and to the economy and everything else. And yet at the same time, you want to protect the kids. Now, flu happens to hit kids hard. And even in that situation, it was tough to do. This is a situation where the numbers seem, at least on the surface, to be better for the younger group of Americans. And yet still no consensus about what exactly to do.
Yeah. Oh, hard one. Did we see any localized school closings for 2009? Were there...
No, because the consensus after a while was, no, don't do it. Let's just leave it alone for a bit. So there were places that, closed for brief periods of time to, quote, deep clean, I think they called it. Okay. Whether that did any good or not, it seemed to be more, of a feel-good kind of effort.
I think that was the initial announcement for our schools for COVID-19. Well, we're going to close for 2 weeks for a deep cleaning and then see what happens.
Right, as if as soon as they get there, kids don't touch stuff.
Yeah, right.
I never figured that out, but
they love
whatever.
to keep their hands to themselves.
I like getting the mold out, so that was good.
Yeah, right. For a lot of places, I'm sure it was a welcome break.
Get rid of the carpets, do all that stuff that helps make things better. And, in the end, an improvement. But the other thing that I think is important to highlight, and this has certainly come out, is the number of states, which is an extraordinarily large number. This was Kaiser Health Foundation pointing this out, that in their public health departments don't have epidemiologists.
Oh.
Like most of them. In other words,
public
health has been starved of resources for years and years and years and years, and now is when it's going to come to the fore.
Yeah.
and
I
be a
wonder
big issue.
whether they probably. I bet if we had listened in on the discussions, I'm sure it was, well, we got to save money on the budget and everything. Well, how can we not? How can we eliminate the position of epidemiologist in the state health department? Oh, well, the federal government will take care of it. CDC, federal government. We'll just rely on their guidance when the pandemic breaks out. I'm sure that a lot of people thought that that was going to be the case.
Right. Now, there is an article in the New York Times that I've been waiting for 4 years.
All right.
Which finally came.
Great, I guess. Well,
right. It's in Upshot. All right.
All right.
And you'll love the title. Meet the supporters Trump has lost.
Okay, now I get
It's the anti-diner story.
Yeah, all right.
A significant majority of people who voted for him in 2016 are planning to do so again. What's different about those who've had a change of heart? So we're talking about how Democrats see it. Oh, we just have to do more focus groups and actually hone in on his performance. I would love to be a strategist and consultant who came up with that after a year and got paid really well to do that. I could have told them that for a lot cheaper than what they probably did. Yeah, but let's look at the actual people and see what's going on here. For some, the disenchantment started almost as soon as Donald J. Trump took office. For others, his handling of the coronavirus and social unrest turned them away. For all of them, it's highly unlikely they'll vote for him again.
All right.
I think if he weren't such an appalling human being, he'd make a great president, because I think what this country needs is somebody who isn't a politician, said Judith Goins, 53, a finance executive at a home building company in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
All right.
Right. But obviously with the coronavirus and social unrest we're dealing with, that's where you need a politician, somebody with a little bit more couth.
Okay.
I'm ashamed to say I voted for him, who described herself as a staunch Republican.
Oh.
Okay. So you got people like that, and you go, all right, fine. You're welcome to vote with us.
Yes,
now, these 2016 Trump voters might not all be considered part of the president's base. Many were not enthusiastic. As 6% of battleground state Trump voters, they're just a sliver of the overall electorate, and 2% of battleground state voters who supported Clinton in 2016 say they'll vote for Trump. I'm not sure if that's going to really pan out. But Trump defectors play an outsized role because he won by a narrow margin. Another 6% of Trump voters in these states say they no longer support Trump, while allowing some chance they'll vote for him again. Okay. And the majority of the defectors disapprove of his performance on every major issue except the economy, as we were talking about before. Somewhat surprisingly, they're demographically similar to the voters who continue to support him. They're only marginally likelier to be women or white college graduates. So what's interesting is the demographics are exactly the same as the other Trump voters. The only difference is they've come to their senses.
Okay.
It's not that, okay, well, I can look at this demographic and say you're certain white college degree voters of a certain age living in the suburb, and therefore you're left-handed and you're more likely to be. No, they're just exactly like everybody else. It's just that for whatever reason, they can see what they can see. And, my working theory on this is, when you've made a commitment to vote for somebody, you really don't want to admit to yourself that you were wrong, and everybody has a different time frame for when they're willing to admit that they've been lying to themselves.
I see. Okay.
And some people do it sooner, and some people do it later, but a lot of people do it in the end, enough to make a difference in terms of the election. Now, in interviews, and we talked about this on the show the other day, many said they were initially backing Trump because he was a businessman, not a politician. And in particular, he wasn't Hillary Clinton.
Right.
But they've soured on his handling of the presidency. Several mentioned his divisive style, his firing of officials who disagreed with him, and especially his response to the coronavirus and the unrest in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd in police custody. Yeah. Now, not all of them are ready to back Biden, but they no longer entertain the possibility of backing the president. Some will stay home. Some will write in a third party. But, the point of all of this is that coronavirus and Black Lives Matter and secondarily to coronavirus, the economy, have changed everything. And they'll give him a pass on the economy and say it's not his fault, coronavirus did it. But they will not give him a pass on the other things. And that's enough to not vote for him. And I think on our side, there's a schadenfreude about it. That's fine. But there's also a revenge component to it. There's a rub your face in it. From our side, we want them to agree on every point that Trump is terrible. Not going to happen. That's why I'm bringing it up. Leave them alone on the economy. Let them have the economy. If they vote against them and hate him for all the other reasons, who cares? You don't have to make them hate him on every single thing.
There are plenty of things.
There are plenty of things.
Right, and I guess there's a new one. I guess while we're speaking, Trump has come to the microphones to discuss. I guess I don't know whether he ran over there to do something about the jobs numbers.
Well, that's what my assumption is. He never talks in the morning unless he has good job numbers, and it's only on a Thursday or Friday.
Yeah, and but apparently, well, I shouldn't wonder at his getting bad reviews from my Twitter feed about it, but apparently not going all that well, not fully awake, and not performing up to par. So, okay, these people are right. The article is well timed. It took a long time to get around to it. I wonder if they should have asked them, do you have one of the hats? I would like to know how Trump regret correlates with whether or not, or how many of them you've got, the hats. I feel like that people say, I'm disappointed in him and I don't believe he's a good human being, but I do have the hat. And so what can you do? I'm afraid that there are more people than we think who might say, well, you know, I did what I did.
Again, when you step back, you know, people focus too much on the day-to-day stuff. You know, like with the coronavirus, you know, what's the body count today compared to yesterday?
Okay, yes.
How many cases do we have today compared to yesterday? You got to step back and look at the bigger picture. What's it like compared to last month? You know,
that's not even that big.
With Trump, you know, you can say, well, there's 4 months left before the election, and everybody knows 24 hours is a lifetime in politics. Not when the basic underlying fundamental things that you judge a president by are already embedded in your head. There's nothing that's going to happen in the next 4 months that's going to make you think all of a sudden Trump is competent and he can handle coronavirus. He's not going to change. He's not going to all of a sudden become competent. Put it this way, there's nothing that's going to convince us that all of a sudden Jared knows what he's doing.
No. Well, that's certainly true.
Well, why would it not be true for Trump? You know, Jared has 4 months left to change his reputation about how incompetent he is. Stephen Miller has 4 months left to change the idea that he's a white nationalist.
Yes.
You look at these things and say, that's absurd. Why are you even saying that? Well, Trump has 4 months left to change the... Well, no.
And we could forget it all. Well, he's intent on not allowing us to forget, apparently.
Well, that's the thing. He is who he is. There is no possible way.
What he's saying right now.
You know, you could say, well, if he were different, he'd have those 4. True. Well, if he were different, he wouldn't be in the situation he is right now.
And he's not different. Like as
not going to change.
As we're speaking, people are tweeting the quotes from him. He's on coronavirus, telling people they don't need anything. President Trump says of governors, "We are the ventilator king." He now says, and also took some time to say African Americans have really made historic gains under his presidency. It's been fantastic.
That's funny because I'm reading this article in the LA Times as we speak. Trump in a hole digs deeper into racial incitement.
Yeah, well, so he's intent on doing this very moment.
You know, I half expect him to say, you know, nobody loves me more than my blacks.
You're right. Yeah.
As if I own them.
Yeah, well, that's historically, I think, where his brain is. Yeah, I don't know. But, well, good news. We are the ventilator king, whatever that's supposed to mean. He is. Hurrah for the ventilator
He's thinking
king.
of Papaya King, which is this great hot dog, restaurant on like 86th Street.
I was thinking Pirate King, but easy to make that mistake.
Yep. Anyway, so that's really what's going on. Okay.
Man, that's a lot. And we haven't even gotten to, let's see, the Nazi T-shirts. We did forget about that one, apparently. They came out with a T-shirt the Trump campaign did for sale.
Or retweeting things 88 times, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, right. Stuff like that. Another one of those things. Oops, accidentally, we made our new logo, which came out of nowhere. They've never used before. Right. Look exactly like some...
Here's the overall big picture, stepping back. Politico Morning Consult survey from yesterday. As Trump approval dips... 6 in 10 voters give the president negative marks, and a new record, 75% of voters say the country's pretty seriously on the wrong track, which is a record high for the Trump presidency. People are not happy with how the country's doing, and that includes a lot of Republicans. I think there's a new high for Republicans in regard to wrong track on this one. And in a Monmouth poll, separately. I think 18% say the country was on the right track. I mean, these are phenomenally low numbers.
Yes.
And a single jobs report is not going to change that. People don't get carried away about, this changes. I'm expecting Van Jones to say, well, this is the day Trump truly became president because look at this pivot. And now, just don't go there.
I guess not. And he won't allow you to. So the morning headlines are going to be fantastic. This crisis is being handled, he tells everybody. No, not a word on who's handling it. And a great Trumpism on those employment numbers. These are not numbers made up by me. These are numbers. All right, well, that clears things up. Just
like this is a Bible.
Yeah, right. Is that your Bible? It's a Bible.
It's a Bible.
Did you make these numbers up?
Well,
these numbers were not made up by me. Jared did it. That's all. But, just that, they're numbers.
Yeah, I'll give you a number, 42.
I guess. Why not? Just
you
throw
and
it out
is on it.
This is amazing. So I know I wish we were watching this thing. I'm sure it would be endlessly entertaining. But your whole day will be filled with quotes from this press conference and people's reactions to it. And I imagine that's another, what is it, Project Lincoln? Lincoln Project? I keep forgetting which way I do it.
Project Lincoln.
Okay, so that's another ad.
The more we see
him,
yes. I think, who's a Club for Growth? Project Lincoln has so much gotten into Trump's head, the Club for Growth.
Yes.
He's running ads against Project Lincoln, which may be the first time in history that a super PAC is running ads against another super PAC.
Right. Yeah. I'm going to start a new thing. I'm going to start Club Foot Growth, I think. Just so people it comes to mind every time they say that, Club for Growth. Like, growth, to me, I know that they are, of course, thinking of economic growth. To me, it's sort of like, something you need to see the dermatologist.
Yeah, Club for Tumor.
Yeah, gross. Well, all right, yeah, this inter-super PAC war is very interesting as well. And, right, and the blossoming influencer role for Kellyanne Conway's daughter, still rocketing to the top of the charts as a TikTok influencer in her own right. This is very interesting to watch as well.
So I'll leave you with that.
Yes.
Lots going on.
Not
we'll have a little bit of a holiday weekend, but the stuff's still going to happen. It's going to be about coronavirus. It's not going to be good. Don't get fooled by the 4 hours worth of concentrating on jobs, which cable news will do. It's not the real world, and it's not the real picture. So I'll leave you with that.
Where is the stock market?
And we'll be back on Monday, right?
Yes, Monday after our holiday weekend, which we declare our independence from something. At this point, I don't know what. All right, yeah. Thanks for catching us up, Greg. Lots of big overarching stories to weave the smaller stuff into today.
Right, and voting's going to start in a very, very short time. We're counting down to 100 days for the official start of voting week, election week, since it'll take a week to count all the votes. Oh, yeah. But things are looking pretty good for the Democrats, and we'll leave it at that. Take care, and I will talk to you on Monday.
All right, very good. We'll look forward to hearing from you then, and enjoy your weekend. Okay, let's see. Where to go next? Oh, I thought the big news intervening in our morning commentary would be the Ghislaine Maxwell arrest. But I think attention has been turned to Trump. I don't know how long he's going to stay at the microphone and continue with his ludicrous utterances, but I hope it's all morning, quite honestly. It's always good for us when he is allowed to wander to the microphone and babble for a while. It's good for us here when it happens to me. So, it's got to be good for the country when the president is able to do it. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to have one eye on the Twitter feed. If you hear anything outrageous, you could tweet it to me, but I'll just admonish you to please listen to the show rather than the president. We're so much more entertaining and fun, and we sometimes will say things that are true. Anyway, Ghislaine Maxwell arrested, yet to be arraigned, so there's not much in the way of news about it other than the fact that they've finally decided, yes, this is somebody that we have to detain at this point. She's been running around free for far too long, so I guess they've got their act together on her prosecution and are ready to move forward. And that's good news. Let's see, what else did I put away in the overnight and early morning hours? Small bore story here, but also of some interest to us. The Hill reporting and then tweeting out that they had reported that Twitter has removed a photo from a Trump tweet after the New York Times lodged a copyright complaint. So, it's interesting to see Twitter continue gingerly to advance in enforcing its rules against Trump in the way they enforce them against everybody else. So that's of some interest. What's the photo? Let's see if we can get a quick word on that. Let's see. Twitter on Wednesday removed an image from a tweet by Trump after the Times filed a copyright claim, marking the second time the tech company has taken such a step regarding content shared by the president. It was a tweet with a meme featuring a black and white image of himself pointing at the camera with text that read, oh yes, I saw this one. In reality, they're not after me, they're after you. I'm just in the way. They were really proud of themselves with that one. The original image, taken by Pulitzer-winning Times photographer Damon Winter, came from a 2015 Times feature on the president's candidacy. It says here that the photo has since been replaced with a notice that reads, quote, "This image has been removed in response to a report from the copyright holder." What's really interesting, I think, about this one is doubtless Trump thought, he's probably shocked by the fact that there's a copyright problem with this. He's like, it's a picture of me. I'm the subject of the photo. I should be the one who has the rights in this photo. And I imagine a lot of people who don't know very much about copyright law, and that's most people really, honestly, who wants to spend time learning about copyright law, probably think that that's, true or something close to true. But if you stop and figure it out, of course, the copyright belongs to the person who took the photo and composed the photo, particularly for these kinds of professional photos. That makes a great deal of sense. But he's probably astonished to find out that he doesn't control it, or probably equally astonished to find out that copyright law applies to the President of the United States. Why can't I just order it not to? Anyway, I don't think it's going to perturb him a whole lot, except that I think that they were super proud of that meme. And, this will catch them flat-footed. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's just sort of run through what I've got parked here in Pocket and get through as much of it as we can. I don't know if I can prioritize this today or not, but we'll go semi-chronologically unless something else grabs my eye. This note from Mark Sumner yesterday over at Daily Kos, just want to get the idea in your head, as we found out the other day that the CDC head, Redfield, was telling people in congressional testimony that it was likely that there were 10 times the number of COVID-19 infections out there as had been, in fact, measured by testing, which puts us at about, we should check in with the Worldometers this morning, but it would put us in the neighborhood of, say 28,000 or 28 million infections, as opposed to the 2.8 million or so that we think we have. What's the morning numbers on these? 2.781 million. So on our way to 2.8 million. We stand at nearly 131,000 deaths recorded on Worldometers today. Brazil about to bypass 1.5 million cases. They recorded just 60,000 deaths. Just 60,000 deaths. Anyway, I also noted the other day the situation among the individual states here in the U.S., and Montana broke through as the last yesterday of the 48 contiguous states to have fewer than 1,000 cases of COVID-19 to report. They're now over 1,000. Alaska and Hawaii on their way over, but they're what would we say? Is it they're not discontinuity? I don't know. Their separation from the contiguous states, I think, has protected them. In Alaska, of course, that distance is compounded by the low population density. Hawaii, which has a higher population density, is separated, of course, by geography. The water being harder to get through than the land that separates the United States lower 48 from Alaska. But 978 cases currently, according to Worldometers, in Alaska, 926 in Hawaii. So some of the other territories doing better than that. 280 cases in Guam, which is amazing since we sent a aircraft carrier full of COVID-19 to Guam, but we at least isolated the sailors that had been on board of that ship. You remember the USS Teddy Roosevelt. It's amazing that they've held their numbers down, but they are creeping up. The Mariana Islands, with just 31, even more isolated than Hawaii, and the United States Virgin Islands, a little less isolated than that, but still 92 cases there. It's just been interesting to watch what's been happening in the mainland U.S. And by the way, as far as total cases per million in population go, if each of the individual states were out there competing, as it were, among the world's nations, almost every American state would be up at the top of the list in terms of per capita rates of infection. We've done a terrible job with this. It's just flat true. Anyway, I don't think I actually need to tell you that. But what Mark Sumner was going to tell you is that in addition to having underestimated the number of infections out there, it turns out that we are probably, and we've been on this case generally, that we've been undercounting the number of deaths. But by how much? Well, the headline says it all here. COVID-19 cases continue to increase and deaths from the disease may be 30% higher than reported. And we got some inkling of that, I think, yesterday. But it's been rather remarkable to note in headline form. I don't think I'm going to necessarily dive into the entirety of the article, although Mark tends to be concise and brief in most cases. But I think you get what you need to know from the headline on that one. Let's see. Washington Post piece here, illustrated with some of the newer photography featuring Republican elected officials who had previously resisted mask wearing, now wearing their masks, including Vice President Pence and Arizona Governor Doug Ducey in this photo. The piece in the Post, coronavirus cases rose by nearly 50% last month, led, of course, by states that reopened first. Getting back to what we were talking about right at the opening of the show, all of the sacrifice from the months of lockdown and stricter form in the Northeast anyway than most of the rest of the country, but lots of sacrifice made everywhere. It led to a lot of protest, as you know, but now all undone, largely by the people who, that 15% or less who came out and made noise about wanting a haircut, getting their way. And, well, by rights, we should hunt those people down and beat them. Perhaps not to death, just a good thrashing here and there. But, you can't advocate for that stuff. It just has to happen organically, I guess. And then we all tut-tut and shake our heads and say, we can't resort to violence. But I don't know how else to put it. These idiots came out and protested because they weren't getting haircuts. And you know what? We could probably beat up some of the media that covered it too. Because why not? What the hell? Let's mete out some punishment there too. Including, I guess, don't forget, Bret Stephens, who gave, what was supposed to be the intellectual underpinnings of this idiotic movement. Why do we all have to play by New York rules? Because New York rules will save your life. But, to hell with that. Anyway, coronavirus infections in the United States surged nearly 50% in June as states relaxed quarantine rules and tried to reopen their economies, data compiled Wednesday showed. And several states moved to reimpose restrictions on bars and recreation. Good. Lots of discussion, by the way, to follow up with what Greg was pointing to, the big problem really being the reopening of schools and how are we going to do it, and it being so necessary. to the rest of our recovery, a lot of people taking note of how much work and how much attention has been put into reopening things as stupid and useless as bars. And if you worked in one, I understand, people like to go to them. That's where people like to spend their disposable income. But honestly, probably even most people who work in bars, maybe not bar owners, but maybe some of them too, would realize, reopening the schools really should have gotten the attention we gave to reopening our gyms and bars. Shouldn't really have been top priority, but I guess they probably thought that would be the easiest to deal with, and we don't have to reopen schools because it's summer, even though probably we should reopen during the summer if we could have. We should have tried to do it because the distance learning thing was worthless. Kids didn't get a thing out of that. And that's a major complaint for a lot of people around the country and around the world. Anyway, more than 800,000 new cases reported across the country last month, led by Florida, Arizona, Texas, and California, bringing the nation's officially reported total to just over 2.6 million, according to data compiled by the Washington Post. States that took an aggressive approach to reopening led the country in infection spikes, along with California, the nation's most populous state, which would be why it's among those with the biggest spikes, where the leaders were in fact more cautious. California on Wednesday reported 110 new deaths, more than any other state. So I think the ones who are guilty of reopening irresponsibly are now pointing to California, saying, well, they have an even bigger problem, and they were more cautious. Yeah, well, they're 18 times your size, too. Don't let that influence you. The novel coronavirus continued its recent spread, especially in the South and Southwest. More than 52,000 new cases were reported in the United States on Wednesday, the highest total since the start of the pandemic, according to data collected by the Post. Record-shattering numbers of new cases were reported Wednesday in 6 states. California, of course, Georgia, Texas, Alaska. Interestingly, we just talked about how remote and they are and how that's keeping the numbers down. But also in North Carolina and Arizona. I guess maybe it's not that hard to shatter the record in Alaska if you get some of that virus in the right place where the people are. Let's see. I think probably you get the idea here, but there are bits and pieces to this article which are of some interest. Let's see. California's new daily high of 9,740 cases reported for the day before yesterday. Let's see. The governor, amid the recent spike in cases and hospitalizations after early success against the virus, on Wednesday ordered 19 counties to shut down all indoor services and activities before the holiday weekend, meaning that bars, restaurants, and other businesses will remain open only outside, which really is where you want to enjoy them anyway, in July. So, I don't know, not so horrible, I think, there. Pennsylvania ordered protective masks to be worn in public. New York City delayed the planned loosening of restrictions on indoor dining, thankfully. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer ordered the end of indoor service at bars through most of the state's lower region, citing a spike in cases among younger people. Big concern these days. Newsom's order was the latest step that the governor has taken to impose new rules on counties that in late spring appeared to have the virus largely under control. While it names only a minority of California's 58 counties, the reclosing order will affect nearly 75% of the state's residents, including those who live in L.A., the Silicon Valley, and the East Bay area. Over the past 2 weeks, coinciding largely with the reopening of bars and restaurants, hospitalization rates in California have climbed 52% because of new virus infections. The rate of Californians testing positive for the virus has also jumped 6% over that time. L.A. County, the county alone, which passed 100,000 cases earlier this week, has been the epicenter of the virus in the state's south, where several neighboring counties were also named in Newsom's order, but new cases have also risen sharply in the Bay Area and the capital, Sacramento. Sacramento County, of course, also on that list. I think the other thing that we've taken note of from this article and others is where California now falls in total cases. It's been this way for a while, but California having of late surpassed New Jersey which, I mean, you have to expect that it will because of the size of California's population, but they were doing well with the virus, relatively speaking, for some time. And but once the ball starts rolling in a populated, in a state with that kind of population, you'll see them moving up the charts. So there they are. Now, New York still at number one, and by a comfortable margin, if a margin of the number of people with coronavirus can be considered comfortable. But, yeah, of some interest, certainly, that's happening. I guess other stories of interest and other outbreaks are all out there. I guess did I collect some of these, or did I just retweet some of these the other day? Just some stupid stories and some things that sound like urban legends, too, circulating out there. I think a story from out of Alabama, was it? That I would say still stays in the rumor category, though lots of people keep insisting that it happened and supposedly confirming the story, but there's always some sort of degree of separation that they heard from someone who heard from someone that the crazy kids down there in Alabama were having COVID-19 parties, getting together and intentionally inviting someone who was known to be infected, and then having a betting pool, and everybody puts money in, and whoever gets the first positive test as a result of the party wins the pool. Now, how they do that forensically, I don't know. How do we know that the person wasn't already infected with COVID-19 and they're cheating to get them? Anyway, doesn't matter. It sounds like, quite honestly, it sounds like something they made up. It has all the hallmarks to me of an urban legend type story, but that's what the adults want to circulate about the kids. They want to blame the kids for this latest outbreak, and there's some truth to it, I suppose, if it's coming from beach week and trips to the bars, and even if one of these idiot kids had a party like that or joked about it at a party, that's enough to panic the adults. All right, let's see other things worth updating. More news on the bounties story, including a report from the Daily Beast. I originally thought that maybe we should go back to the very beginning and run through these stories in detail and try to parse them, but I think we'll instead rely for that parsing on people who have gotten a jump start on it and have been scrutinizing the details and parsing them from the beginning. I'll just give you the updates that I saw that looked like they were of some importance from from the last day or so. The Daily Beast reporting the headline, Russian bounties for killing Americans go back 5 years, ex-Taliban claims. Now, I don't know whether you can or should trust ex-Taliban or whether they're better or more trustworthy than current Taliban or what, but I was thinking that maybe you would see the Trump administration clinging to this story in an attempt to say, well, 5 years, so that it's Obama's fault. It seems very natural for something, a natural thing for them to try to adopt. Of course, it doesn't really, help at all, because Trump's been president for the last almost 4 years, and if it was something that might have started 5 years ago, I'm certain that they didn't send a press release to President Obama announcing the start of the bounty program. And if they had, he probably would have paid some attention to it and done something about it. Though, again, big mystery. Exactly what do you do about it? But anyway, let's see. What do we have here? We ought to credit our writers here. Sami Yousafzai, maybe. You're a difficult one for me. Adam Ronsley, less difficult. Christopher Dickey, very easy. And Aaron Banco. All right. The story, as I said, Russian bounties for killing Americans go back 5 years, according to some ex-Taliban sources. Subheader here says, Russia has been courting the Taliban since at least 2014, with money and weapons, ostensibly to fight ISIS, and certainly to undermine the American efforts in Afghanistan as well. Taliban veterans like to laugh about the first time, according to their lore, that the Russians dumped a lot of American dollars on them. During the Taliban campaign to take over all of Afghanistan in 1995, they actually had few fighter planes. I can't imagine that they had any. I mean, I guess they did, though. I'm surprised. And they used one to force a Russian cargo plane, a huge Ilyushin IL-76TD flying for a company called Airstan. They forced this thing to land in Kandahar. The Taliban held the Russian crew members prisoner for a year until one day they supposedly, quote, escaped and managed to take the plane with them. How many millions of dollars that took to arrange, the Taliban have never said, but after the long, bloody decade of the 1980s throwing off Soviet occupation, squeezing the Russians for money like that remains a source of amusement. Mullah Manan Niazi, my best stab at that name, who was spokesman for the Taliban leader Mullah Omar in those days, brought up the incident when the Daily Beast asked him about reports that the Russians have offered and perhaps paid, they say perhaps paid, bounties to Taliban who kill American soldiers. The Russians paying U.S. dollars. It's not odd for the Taliban, he said, his voice fraught with irony over the encrypted phone call as he recalled the Airstan incident. As for the current situation, the Taliban have been paid by Russian intelligence for attacks on U.S. forces and on ISIS forces in Afghanistan from 2014 up to the present. In the world of intelligence gathering, such a statement from such a figure would be worth noting, and just the kind of thing that could lead to what the Trump White House has called inconclusive reporting from reporting the Russian offer of bounties to kill Americans. Mullah Manan Niazi was a very senior figure in the Taliban when they were in power and also when they were driven into exile and underground after 2001. But since the death of Mullah Omar was made public in 2015, he has been a dissident and liable to be killed by the current Taliban leadership if it catches up with him. They have accused him of collaborating with the CIA and the Afghan government's intelligence service, and that would be the National Directorate of Security, or NDS, which he denies. So, Niazi speaks as someone who knows the organization and its top people very well, but who also has an agenda very different from theirs, with his own reasons for confirming the bounty story, and he does not offer further specifics on that. But he does offer details about what he says are the long-standing ties between the Taliban and the Russians, as well as the Iranians, and U.S. officials have been tracking those developments. A U.S. intelligence report about Russian assistance to the Taliban has circulated on Capitol Hill and throughout the national security apparatus over the last several days. According to 3 individuals who have read or who are familiar with the report, the assessment is long and covers a span of several years, focusing generally on how Russia provides support, including financial assistance to the Taliban. The report also touches on the Russian bounties first reported by the New York Times, though those who read the report say that data point is circumstantial and that the investigation is ongoing. 2 individuals who spoke to the Daily Beast, though, said it's clear from the report that there's an increased risk for U.S. troops in Afghanistan because of Russia's behavior. In important ways, this classified report mirrors an unclassified document produced last month by the Congressional Research Service, which offered a crisp summation. Quote, in the past 2 years, multiple U.S. commanders have warned of increased levels of assistance and perhaps even material support for the Taliban from Russia and Iran. That one, I'm sure Trump would be willing to believe, both of which cite Islamic State presence in Afghanistan to justify their activities. Both nations were opposed to the Taliban government of the late 1990s, but reportedly see the Taliban as a useful point of leverage vis-a-vis the United States. We introduced 2 Taliban to the Russians undercover as businessmen, said Niazi, looking back on operations when he was still part of the Taliban insurgent leadership. They went to Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. With Russian-supplied funds, we purchased oil, wheat, and flour and imported it into Afghanistan and then sold it there. That's how we converted Russian funds into cash in Afghanistan. Both men, contacted by the Daily Beast, vehemently denied such activity. I don't want to comment. I don't even want to talk about Niazi, said one of them, who, as a matter of fact, pays frequent visits to Moscow. Just happens to be the case. Niazi is our enemy and playing into the hands of the NDS. Other monies came through the Hawala System. Do you remember when we talked about that? We talked about it in the context of the rug trading and the Manafort money laundering. Do you remember that whole system? the Hawala System, which originated in India and is used throughout South Asia and now in many parts of the world. The U.S. Treasury notes Hawala is distinguished by trust and the extensive use of connections such as family relationships or regional affiliations. Unlike traditional banking, Hawala makes minimal, often no, use of any sort of negotiable instrument. Transfers of money take place based on communications between members of a network of Hawaladars, or Hawala dealers. A senior Afghan security officer told the Daily Beast that he is, quote, not aware of any Russians smuggling money, but noted that the International Financial Action Task Force combating support for terrorism recently put pressure on the Afghan government to take practical action against suspect Hawala dealers, so the Afghan security forces raided some of the money changers. Many sources, including Mullah Manan Niazi, note the Russian and Iranian role supporting the Taliban in the fight against the so-called Islamic State in Khorasan, also known as ISIS-K, or ISIL-K, if we're still sticking to the ISIL thing. Although, why stick with the L if that's for Levant? Anyway, early on in the Trump administration, General John Nicholson, then the commander of NATO's Resolute Support Mission in Afghanistan, warned Congress that Russia, quote, has become more assertive over the past year, unquote, in Afghanistan and was overtly lending legitimacy to the Taliban to undermine NATO efforts and bolster belligerence using the false narrative that only the Taliban are fighting ISIL-K. It's a very awkward moniker for them. Russia reportedly complemented its public rhetorical support for the Taliban with a covert supply program. The Washington Post reported that year that the U.S. intelligence services believed Russia had sent machine guns to the Taliban. An anonymous military source told the Post that the U.S. had found Russian-provided weapons in areas where the group was waging war on coalition forces and ISIS's Afghan affiliate had little presence. We've had weapons brought to this headquarters and given to us by Afghan leaders who said this was given by the Russians to the Taliban, Nicholson said in a 2018 BBC interview. We know that the Russians are involved. Indeed, that's a very interesting addition, rhetorically speaking, to this report. Indeed, various Taliban have told, it's indeed period, not indeed comma. That's what made it so interesting. Various Taliban have told the Daily Beast they were quite proud of the guns they were given as gifts or rewards, whether for specific acts or simply to cement relationships is unclear. In 2018, Russia denied reports that it sent any arms, but Russian Special Envoy Zamir Kabulov admitted that Moscow had established contacts with the Taliban because it was seriously worried about possible terror threats for the Russian mission and the Russian citizens in Afghanistan. But in September of 2019, Russia elevated its talks with the insurgents to a formal visit by a Taliban delegation in September. According to a well-placed Taliban source, after some of the group's representatives made a trip to Moscow, they were given 30 state-of-the-art guns, apparently large-caliber sniper rifles, not sniper rifles, powerful enough to shoot through walls. I saw personally 3 of them in Helmand, said the source. They were still full of grease, which is to say, brand new out of the box. As military scholar David Kilcullen points out in his recent book, The Dragons and the Snakes, How the Rest Learned to Fight the West, the U.S. obsession with its global war on terror after 9/11 created an opportunity for Russia and other hostile powers. They were exploiting our exclusive focus on terrorism, seeking to fill the geopolitical, economic, and security vacuum we had left as we became bogged down in the wars of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. In the present day, it serves Russia's interests to keep the United States bogged down there, despite official Russian statements to the contrary. It worked for us. We kept them bogged down there and undid the Soviet Union, right? What others call hybrid warfare, Kilcullen defines somewhat differently as exploitation of situations in flux, which certainly is the case in Afghanistan, with the U.S. president determined to declare he's made a complete exit, even though there are only 8,600 U.S. troops left on the ground at the moment. Things that are in limbo, transitioning, or on the periphery, that have ambiguous political, legal, and psychological status, or whose very existence is debated, are liminal, wrote Kilcullen, confusing everybody with his attempts to straighten things out. Liminal warfare exploits this character of ambiguity, operating in the blur, or as some Western military organizations put it, the gray zone. That precisely is where the Russians have learned to thrive. That's in the timing is good now that they've stopped here. It's just it's left the story in a little bit of confusion. But I guess the key takeaway there is that at least some people allege that this kind of activity, whether for targeting ISIS fighters or Americans, has been going on for quite some time. Expect the Trump administration to misinterpret that and try to exploit it. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We've got one more segment left to go here. I thought I might continue on with this theme, though, and add a few more of these stories on Afghanistan. The last one I picked up from the New York Times yesterday on the same topic, but with a slightly different angle. I guess they were the ones who, along with most of the rest of the story, broke the bit about the mechanics of the payment of the cash. Afghan contractor handed out Russian cash to kill Americans, officials say. A small-time businessman became a key middleman for bounties on coalition troops in Afghanistan, U.S. intelligence reports say. Friends saw him grow rich, but did not know how. That a joint work of, let's see, Mujib Mashal, Eric Schmidt, Najim Rahim, and Rukmini Kalimanchi in the New York Times from yesterday's paper. And the narrative begins this way. He was a lowly drug smuggler, neighbors and relatives say, then ventured into contracting, seeking a slice of the billions of dollars the U.S. coalition was funneling into construction projects in Afghanistan. But he really began to show off his wealth in recent years after establishing a base in Russia, though how he earned those riches remained mysterious. On his regular trips home to northern Afghanistan, he drove the latest model cars, protected by bodyguards, and his house was recently upgraded to a 4-story villa. Now, Ramatullah Azizi. I think we got that right. Ramatullah, yep. Stands as a central piece of a puzzle rocking Washington, named in American intelligence reports and confirmed by Afghan officials as a key middleman who for years handed out money from a Russian military intelligence unit to reward Taliban-linked fighters for targeting American troops in Afghanistan, according to American and Afghan officials. Thankfully, we already have the story because the sentence makes it sound like it's really pretty confusing. But again, right, I guess driving the latest model cars back and forth between Russia and Afghanistan. Of course, those of you who remember Russia's involvement in Afghanistan during the late 70s and 80s will remember that they share a border, but it's not readily or not necessarily widely known by, I guess, younger observers. But it reminds me, how do you get there from Russia? And I remember this is where we learned our geopolitical history from the movie, the Chevy Chase, the Dan Aykroyd film, Spies Like Us, right? You take the Dushanbe Road, right? I imagine the pronunciation is somewhat screwy, but that's what they used. I think they actually said in the movie. They said Dushanbe, which made it sound like it was French, but Dushanbe, I think, is the Americanized version of however it might be pronounced locally. But I do recall seeing that name pop up back in the news and saying, oh yeah, I remember that, and I remember it from Spies Like Us. Maybe you do too. That was probably more important than the actual news here, but fine, we'll get back to the boring stuff. Now, let's find out what's going on here. As security agencies connected the dots of the bounty scheme and narrowed in on him, remember, Rahmatullah Azizi, they carried out sweeping raids to arrest dozens of his relatives and associates about 6 months ago, but discovered that Mr. Azizi had sneaked out of Afghanistan and was likely back in Russia. What they did find in one of his homes in Kabul was about $500,000 in cash. American and Afghan officials have maintained for years that Russia was running clandestine operations to undermine the U.S. mission in Afghanistan and aid the Taliban, but U.S. officials only recently concluded that a Russian spy agency was paying bounties for killing coalition troops, including Americans, which the Kremlin and the Taliban have denied. According to officials briefed on the matter, U.S. intelligence officials believe the program is run by Unit 29155, an arm of the Russian military intelligence agency known as the GRU, that has carried out assassinations and other overseas operations, including, by the way, a lot of the hacking, allegedly, in the 2016 election, that a conduit for the payments would be someone like Mr. Azizi, tied to the American reconstruction effort and meshed in the regional netherworld, but not prominent enough to attract outside attention, speaks to the depth of Russia's reach into the increasingly complicated Afghan battlefield, exploiting a nexus of crime and terror to strike blows with years of deniability. That's a weird way of saying things. The public revelation last week that conclusion has touched off a political firestorm in Washington. White House officials said that first, that President Trump was never briefed on the matter, but it emerged that the intelligence assessment was included in a written briefing to the president in late February, if not earlier. As Democratic and Republican officials have expressed alarm at that news and the administration's lack of action and response, the White House has insisted that the information was uncertain. Details of Mr. Azizi's role in the bounty scheme were confirmed through a dozen interviews that included U.S. and Afghan officials aware of the intelligence and the raids that led to it, his neighbors and friends, and business associates of the middlemen arrested on suspicion of involvement. All spoke on condition of anonymity to avoid retaliation. U.S. intelligence reports named Mr. Azizi as the key middleman between the GRU and militants linked to the Taliban who carried out the attacks. He was among those who collected the cash in Russia, which intelligence files described as multiple payments of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Those files were among the materials provided to Congress this week. Through a layered and complex Hawala System, an informal way to transfer money, he delivered it to Afghanistan for the missions, the files say. Transfers were often sliced into smaller amounts that routed through several regional countries before arriving in Afghanistan, associates of the arrested businessman said. Afghan officials said prizes of as much as $100,000 per killed soldier were offered for American and coalition targets. Just how the money was dispersed to militants carrying out the attacks for the Taliban, and at what level the coordination occurred remains unclear, but officials say the network had grown increasingly ambitious and it was in communication with more senior levels in Taliban military ranks to discuss potential targets. About 6 months ago, Afghanistan's intelligence agency, the National Directorate of Security, raided the offices of several Hawala businessmen both in Kabul, the capital, and in Kunduz in the north, who were believed to be associated with the bounty scheme, making more than a dozen arrests. The targets of the operation was Ramat, who was going back and forth to Russia for a long time, and said he worked there, but no one knew what he did, said Safiullah Amiri, the deputy head of Kunduz Provincial Council, referring to Mr. Azizi. But by the time the raid took place, Ramat, for short, I guess, had fled. From what I heard from security officials, the money had come from Russia through Ramat, he added. Russia was initially seen as cooperating with American efforts after the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, as its interests in defeating al-Qaeda an international Islamist terrorist group aligned with those of the United States. But in recent years, as the two powers clashed elsewhere, the Kremlin grew wary of the prolonged U.S. presence and moved closer to the Taliban, hedging its bets on who would take power in a post-American Afghanistan. The Russians also saw an opportunity for long-awaited payback for the Soviet humiliation in Afghanistan in the 1980s, when the Red Army withdrew after being unable to defeat the United States-backed insurgency. Russia has walked a fine balance in recent years, eager to bloody the American nose, but wary of Afghanistan's collapse into chaos that could spill over its borders. Publicly, Russia has admitted only to information sharing with the Taliban in fighting the Islamic State in Afghanistan, a common foe. The U.S. conclusion in 2019 that the Russians were sending bounty money to the Taliban came at a delicate time in the conflict, just as the United States was deep into negotiations with the insurgents over a deal to withdraw the remaining American troops from the country. Some of the attacks, believed to be part of the bounty scheme, were carried out around the time the Trump administration was actively reaching out to Russia for cooperation on those peace talks. Zalmay Khalilzad, the special envoy from the U.S. leading the talks, repeatedly met with Russian officials to build consensus around the American endgame. The Afghan battlefield is saturated with smaller terrorist groups in addition to the Taliban, who are still responsible for the majority of the violence. Criminal networks, profiteers, and terror training experts also freelance their services, often to several groups at the same time. Mr. Azizi, whose neighbors and relatives said he's in his 40s, thrived in that convoluted, murky environment. A friend who has known him since his early days in Kunduz, as well as later in Russia, said he had started off with smuggling small shipments of drugs into Iran in his 20s, but that venture was not very successful. He had returned to northern Afghanistan and somehow won contracts from the American-led coalition forces to build stretches of a couple roads in Kunduz before making his way to Russia. None of those interviewed who knew Mr. Azizi were surprised when his associates were raided about 6 months ago and one of his brothers taken into custody with the $500,000 in cash. As one of his friends put it, he had gone from not even having a blanket to having multiple houses, fancy cars, and security escorts. So I guess that was the big tip there. So now we have a name put to it. That will likely help the narrative along a bit as well. And also noted in pocket here is, let's see, where have I put this one? Yes. I thought this was interestingly put in the headline. Annie Lee writing this in a diary over at Daily Kos. Nobel-hungry Trump, when enticing the Taliban to Camp David, remember when that happened, knew they were getting Russian cash. That, too, a necessary takeaway from the timeline. Yeah, pretty amazing. Remember that inviting the Taliban to Camp David in September 2019. Remember that happened, for one thing, and remember that it was designed to draw attention from the looming problem of the Ukraine aid shakedown that led to impeachment. It was also, as it turns out, or Annie concludes anyway, to help cover up any issue of the Russian bounties, because the VIG would just be increased. Russia. I don't think I'm even following the terminology here, but lots of embedded tweets here to make the case. Let's see, and I guess from around, not all from around that time, but very interesting. Okay, but going on to point out here, lest there be any doubt, Trump will now go full Nixon nutty, argues Annie here, since Kushner's advice has only got him into deeper trouble, beginning with firing Comey in order to expedite the Flynn cover-up in 2017. Remember, Bolton resigned in protest of Trump's decision to invite the Taliban to Camp David. The drug deal had gotten out of hand. Very interesting, and I guess this looks like Axios material she's borrowing here. Trump told people in recent days that he regrets following some of Kushner's political advice, including ironically, supporting criminal justice reform, which was supposedly a big hit for him, and will stick closer to his own instincts. 3 people with direct knowledge of the president's thinking tell Axios. So that's of some interest, I guess. Only sort of, I think, tangentially related to this. So I think we'll jump back out of this thing because I think this is beyond the headline is only confusing things. Sometimes if you're not up to speed on somebody's entire thread of diaries, they fall into references and jargon. Everybody does it at some point. And if you haven't been following them and reading their stuff, it only becomes more confusing. But a good point made here in the headline. When Trump was hoping to be seen as some sort of international leader in the facilitation of a peaceful resolution in Afghanistan, he was in fact dealing with people who he knew or had reason to know at the time were taking bounties to kill American troops. Now, of course, I guess you could argue from his side here, well, we knew the Taliban was killing American troops. We didn't know they were doing it for bounties, but we knew they were doing it. That's why we were having peace talks with them. So I don't know how much additional fuel comes out of that particular revelation, but it's interesting to note that it was something that he was willing to overlook in order to put some sort of political gloss on the whole thing and make him look like a peacemaker, desperate as he is somehow, for whatever reason, to win the Nobel Prize. It's just not going to happen. Okay, let's see. Other pieces of information worth noting. Some quick hits here. At least a few of them, and then we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens after that. We don't have that much more time. Southpaw, NYC Southpaw, with an interesting tweet yesterday leading us to a CNN story. But the brief, quick and dirty tweet here is, here's a looting in progress, which he punctuates with an LOL. The story is this. The excerpt from the CNN story reads this way. The U.S. Treasury is giving a $700 million loan to YRC Worldwide, a troubled trucking company that warned in May it was in danger of going out of business. Okay, I've never heard of this trucking company. Probably you haven't either. But maybe your eyebrows went up. I've never heard of this trucking company and a $700 million loan. Really? Well, CNN goes on to note, that's an enormous sum for a company whose stock has plunged 27% this year, although that's usually the kind of people who need a bailout. But that this company was worth only $70 million as of Tuesday's close. So the whole company worth $70 million. How do you secure a $700 million loan for them? And here's the kicker. The government sued YRC for ripping it off. That sounds pretty amazing. It's accompanied by the stock chart here, which it shows a fairly, long, slow decline over the past couple of months, but then a spike there at the end when it was announced that they were getting a $700 million government loan. What's the story on this one? Let's see. And there's also a follow-up tweet from NYC Southpaw saying, with a quote from the article linked here, of a different article from Freight Waves about YRC trucking. Some may also see this as a bailout of Apollo Global Management, which provided YRC with a $600 million term loan in September. That's pretty amazing. So a total of $1.3 billion to a $70 million company is fairly astonishing. Apollo Global Management, as I recall, is a Jared Kushner connected operation as well. So somehow they gave him $600 million, which wasn't $600 million the amount of money that, no, I think it was more than that, maybe in the $1 billion range, that Kushner had to come up with in order to bail out his own company, his own family's company. But anyway, let's sift through the CNN story. How long is it? Is it a fairly brief read? I think so. Let's do this one. Get these pop-up ads out of the way, please. The Trump administration just lent $700 million to a trucking company sued for ripping off taxpayers. Chris Isidore writes for CNN Business here. Isidore? I don't know. Did you pronounce the E? The U.S. Treasury is giving a $700 million loan to YRC Worldwide, a troubled trucking company we read this part, Enormous sum. Stock plunged 27%. They only were worth $70 million. And then there's the note that the government sued YRC for ripping it off. Long-term competitive problems had taken the company's stock down 85% over the last 5 years. But shares of YRC shot up 60% in early trading on the news of the bailout. U.S. taxpayers will end up owning 30% of the company's stock as part of the loan agreement. Again, the company's worth $70 million. We gave them $700 million, and we get 30% of the company. The loan is not part of the Federal CARES Act meant to help small businesses. Instead, it is meant to provide help to businesses critical to national security. Treasury's statement said the loan was justified by the fact that the company provides a majority of the trucking services moving pallet-sized shipments of freight for the U.S. military, a segment of the industry known as less than truckload, or LTL. Treasury's determination was based on a certification by the Secretary of Defense that YRC is critical to maintaining national security, said Treasury in a statement. Just to remind you, this is the same administration that said Nigel Farage's presence at the Tulsa rally was a matter of national security. So they're willing to say anything as a matter of national security as a way of either throwing people off the scent or triggering exceptions that would otherwise, for transactions or operations that would otherwise be questionable or even illegal, they become legal when they are when we wave them through on national security grounds. But according to a recent filing by YRC, it is in the process of being sued by the Defense Department. The suit, filed in December of 2018, alleges YRC overcharged the Defense Department, as well as failing to comply with the contract terms and related government procurement rules, along with unjust enrichment and breach of contract, according to YRC's filing. YRC has filed a motion seeking to dismiss the complaint and said it intends to vigorously defend itself. The civil complaint charges that YRC reweighed thousands of shipments and suppressed the results whenever they indicated that a shipment was actually lighter than its original estimated weight. So they were coming up short on the things they were supposed to be shipping for the government, and who knows what happened to the things they were supposed to be carrying. The suit said the practice went on for 7 years and cost the Defense Department millions of dollars. This case should serve as a warning to any organization that enters into a contract with the federal government. If you try to rip us off, be prepared to pay a heavy price, said U.S. Attorney James Kennedy in a statement at the time the suit was filed. Of course, that was December of 2018, so that's a million years ago. It's still Trump administration, but, oh, well, we forgot. So this is a warning to any organization that contracts with the government. If you rip us off, be prepared to pay a heavy price, like getting a $700 million loan. The Treasury Department did not respond Wednesday morning to a request for a comment on the suit. Get the pop-up out of the way once again. CNN. YRC said the suit is a contractual dispute which originated in 2009 and predates the current board and CEO by more than a decade. So they say they're not responsible, I guess, even though that's the responsibility they assumed when they took over the board seats. But okay, a motion for dismissal has been pending for 10 months, the company said. There has been no impact on the Defense Department relationship. YRC warned in May that there was a substantial doubt about its ability to stay in business without either federal help or a meaningful stabilization of the economy in the near term. On June 9th, YRC warned that its per-day shipments were down 20% in the quarter, and the rates it was receiving per pound of freight moved were down 6% compared to a year earlier. The company has 30,000 employees, of whom 24,000 are represented by the Teamsters Union. About half the loan money will be used to cover short-term contractual obligations, including pension and health care benefits. The loan will be due in 2024. The Teamster-represented companies once dominated the trucking industry, especially the LTL sector, but with higher labor costs, they have lost market share continually over the course of recent decades. It has posted a profit in only 3 of the last 13 years and lost more than $3 billion in total during that period. YRC was formed through the merger of several of those unionized carriers, including Yellow Freight and Roadway in 2003. It operates under the brands Holland, New Penn, Redaway, and YRC Freight. Maybe you've seen it on the roads back when you were allowed to travel on the highways in this country before coronavirus. But I guess YRC, Yellow and Roadway, and I don't know what the C is, but maybe we'll find out later on. Our 30,000 employees have continued to serve hundreds of quarantined communities across the country during the pandemic, and this financial assistance will help us to bridge this pandemic-related crisis and continue to provide essential shipping services for the nation's supply chain, said CEO Darren Hawkins in a statement about the loan. The loan was also praised by James Hoffa, the younger, General President of the Teamsters Union, who thanked President Donald Trump, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, and Congress for the assistance. They recognized the urgency, acted swiftly to avoid our members' health benefits from being cut, and in the long term to protect 24,000 Teamster jobs, he said in his statement. And I'm sure that makes sense on some level for them. I guess the second article that Southpaw included was from the FreightWaves site, freightwaves.com. YRC gives government 30% stake in its latest financial bailout. Sort of interesting. We'll see what else we can glean from this one. YRC Worldwide unveiled the plans of a new $700 million lending agreement with the U.S. Department of the Treasury, which will in turn receive a stake of nearly 30% in the company. The July 1st press release outlines the latest lifeline for the less-than-truckload carrier. The loan comes from the Federal Lending Program under the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, CARES Act, which is intended to help businesses survive. Okay, but we learned that it was from a sort of a different division of that loan program. The lending agreement will allow IRC to repay recently deferred health and welfare and pension payments to the funds that support its 24,000 Teamster employees, including the underfunded Central States pension. There we go. There's the C probably. And health funds, which YRC is the largest contributor to. The loans will also allow the carrier to make updates to its aging fleet. Some may also see this. There we are. As a bailout of Apollo Global Management, which provided YRC with $600 million in loans in September. And again, here, let's look that up so we can. Apollo Global Management, and we'll say Kushner in there and see what we get here. Kushner's family business received loans after, this is the first article that pops up, after White House meetings. Apollo, the private equity firm, and Citigroup made large loans last year to the family real estate business of Jared Kushner, president's senior advisor. You remember this story? Oh, and also dates to 2018. Just thought we'd put that out there. So Apollo, Joshua Harris, a founder of Apollo Global Management, was advising Trump administration officials on infrastructure policy. During that period, he met on multiple occasions with Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor, said three people familiar with those meetings. Among other things, the two men discussed the possible White House job for Mr. Harris. The job never materialized, but in November 2017, I guess, Apollo lent $184 million to the Kushner family real estate firm, Kushner Companies. The loan was to refinance the mortgage on a Chicago skyscraper. Even by the standards of Apollo, one of the world's largest private equity firms, the previously unreported transaction with the Kushners was a big deal. It was triple the size of the average property loan made by Apollo's real estate lending arm, security filings show. It was one of the largest loans Kushner Companies received last year, 2017. An even larger loan came from Citigroup, which lent the firm and one of its partners $325 million to help finance a group of office buildings in Brooklyn. So there you go. Background on that. Apollo, I don't know whether they made any money on that loan or not, but apparently they had some, I guess, if they didn't have financial difficulties as a result of it, they certainly were looking for some sort of a reward for having participated in the scheme. And I guess here's where the reward comes through. They come in with a loan to YRC last year. I don't know whether they did it at the urging of the White House or Kushner or what, but interesting. So $700 million tossed over to YRC will probably help them repay that loan from Apollo having lent a hand to Kushner when his family needed it. So there you go. Very interesting, and we get the government win-win, I guess they would say probably in the White House. We get 30% share of this company that has perpetually been in trouble for many years after gobbling up smaller trucking companies that have likewise been in trouble. Okay, something to keep an eye on, something we can pick up again on Friday if we find out anything new and interesting about it. But now, for your new and interesting diet, we turn things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. What's on tap? Let's see. You want a Confederate monument? Black bodies are Confederate monuments. I saw that tweeted out the other day, and we'll look into what's behind that statement when Justice's program picks up after this. On the rest of the menu, Los Angeles cut funding for the LAPD by $150 million and reduced the number of officers to a level not seen in more than a decade. A federal judge dealt a setback to a key Trump policy limiting asylum. And we'll try and shoehorn just a little bit more and maybe get into international news after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Okay, Novartis. Remember them? They were once connected to Michael Cohen, right? Novartis is ordered to pay $678 million to settle a lawsuit over a sham speaker program that bribed doctors to prescribe its products, just like the movies. Then a trip around the world quickly. It stops in Turkey and Saudi Arabia coming up next.